history has become a popular preoccupation. It's no longer just academic. The biggest users of archives in the United States are genealogists, family historians. Archivists joke about it. Scrapbooking. I don't know if you have this in Spain, but it's a huge, it began among women in the Mormon church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, keeping family history in these scrapbooks that celebrate family history. A lot of this also uses archival material. Local history is huge, and of course, fan culture is increasingly elaborate, and it has resort to archives. People are collecting diaries, home movies, postcards, scrapbooks that have been produced by strangers. So, this is a disorganized instantiation of the kind of folkloric and language research that you were talking about. It's also, I think, a disturbing trend that the memorabilia that comes out of popular struggles has become a commodity. If you go on eBay, you can buy material from the Black Panther Party, you can buy anti-war material, you can buy old Communist Party membership cards. These are starting to sell for more and more money. And there's new historical tools and services. Many of them are commercial that have come up to exploit this interest. Some of them are not commercial. There's the whole digital humanities movement. If we had another day, we could talk about digital humanities, because in a lot of ways this is the academic fulfillment of the kind of archives that we're talking about here. Augmented reality, I think, is very interesting. It may not last in its current form, but the notion that history lives around us, that history is kind of an infrastructure that is in the air and the cloud and that can be accessed, this is very interesting. Augmented reality, right? If you walk down the street and you hold up a phone, it will tell you what happened in this building. This is a very attractive idea. I'd love to go through all the San Francisco newspapers and compile a database of what happened at every address. But I think people would be very angry if if it was possible to find out that a murder occurred in a house, let's say, because the value of the property would go down. So it's these kinds of new issues. Facebook, of course, has jumped in trying to co-opt this with its timeline feature. This is their attempt to become the powerhouse of personal record keeping. So when a new distribution channel opens up, whether it's cable TV, home video, the internet, satellite, video on demand, it looks for inexpensive content. It looks for cheap airtime. This happened before in the 1970s and the 1980s. We had home video and we had cable TV, and this was kind of a renaissance of archival material because they needed cheap airtime. And now, of course, they look for user-generated content and personal information. This, by the way, is very San Francisco. People tear up the grass outside their house and they paint the concrete green. This is muy típico in the western part of San Francisco. The ephemeral culture used to be considered low, and now elites don't just tolerate the ephemeral, but they've canonized it in the sense that, Twitter has become a means by which public intellectuals, movie stars, politicians, Rupert Murdoch, address the world. The New York Times has moved from long-form journalism to short-form. So all of these things argue about archives in a new way, but not just thinking about them, from using them, and what's more, trying to build them. Do you see what this gasoline pump is offering? It's serving hot soup. This is weird. Every few years there's this conference at MIT called Media in Transition. It's from the Comparative Media Studies department. Some of you have heard of people like Henry Jenkins who used to be there. It's a very interesting conference, and they did one about archives. all sorts of people talked about archives, and people, especially the scholars, started criticizing archives, and this was really weird. They said, you don't collect enough. I went to the archive and I didn't find what I wanted. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And I came out of there feeling this is really weird. What's happened is that scholars and researchers have sort of outsourced the idea of record keeping. They've outsourced the collection of literature. They've outsourced the maintenance of memory to librarians and archivists, who in a sense function with regard to scholars. They function as they're kind of proletarianized. They're paid less. Unless they happen to have faculty status and tenure, they're not respected very much. They're treated as something less than equal. And you know, I thought this was very strange. I began to admire the sort of scholars who did their own collection. You know, entomologists, insect scientists, folklorists who collect their own material, investigators who go out into the field and do not rely on third parties to collect. It seemed to me that, you know, in the context of the famous quote that everyone should be their own historian, and in a certain way everyone should also be their own archivist. So I'm not saying that legacy archives should not exist or that archivists are unworthy of respect. Quite the opposite. I think that archivists need to be empowered. Archivists need to be thought of as active agents in the culture. I like to think of archivists as civic actors. Their work is performative. Their work plays a tremendously important role in the political and social sphere. I started some years ago using the term citizen archivist. I don't like that term anymore because it implies that archival work should be reserved for people who have the proper documents. So I think it's it's complicated when you talk about citizenship in the United States. But the idea is that archivists should think of themselves as people with public responsibilities, not simply as people with jobs that end at 5 p.m. Some of the points that come to make up this cluster I'm trying to express, archives are often inconvenient. And it isn't just because they preserve and they reveal inconvenient records, but they're inconvenient because it's getting harder and harder to take care of collections. The nature of archival work is changing. We can't inventory, catalog, and describe archival records at the folder level anymore. We were never able to document them at the level of each piece of paper. Classically, they were described at the folder level. Archivists would make a list of folders and a list of the contents of a box, and then they would describe the different elements of a collection. Now there's this notion that we need to be much more general in our description because the piles of unprocessed paper are so high. This gets harder and harder, and it gets almost impossible really in the digital world. I was talking with somebody at one of these digital humanities meetings, and he had worked for a GIS, a geodata company, which had to close down. And within a few days, they had to figure out what to do with all this valuable data. And he said, you know, this was really hard. How do you make sure that data is stored properly? Data is a liability. And I thought this was so interesting. This expresses the contradiction of collecting things, that data is at once the treasure, the trophy, the asset, but it's also a liability. And when you think about it, not just digital data that's difficult to store, but in the United States, we threw away newspapers years ago. We photographed them on microfilm badly, and then we threw the original volumes of newspapers away, even if they had value as artifacts. You know, the beautifully printed color supplements of the early 20th century, all thrown away. Now we're throwing away books. Literally tens of millions of library books are being discarded or sold piecemeal every year. As books get scanned, as books show up in Google and in HathiTrust and in the Internet Archive, the small colleges and universities, the religious schools, the independent schools, the regional colleges, it costs a lot of money to keep a book on a shelf, and books are being dumped. We're dumping videotape, because you can digitize videotape and oversample video. So people aren't, and people are quietly, archives won't admit this, but they're junking film. And of course, archivists don't keep all the documents that they, so this whole notion of do physical objects have a right to exist becomes, I think, absolutely fascinating. And then there's this phenomenon of, there's this anxiety about the longevity of digital material, and it's become a full-fledged moral panic. Is that a phrase that's familiar? Moral panic is a term that describes when you need to find an enemy. So it could be it could be immigrants. It could be child molesters. It could be I don't know, young men on skateboards. It could be punk rockers. There's a moral panic right now about digital longevity. And if you read in the press, there's articles about bit rot and format obsolescence and fear of the cloud and archives getting erased. And all of this is pushed together into a very synthesis. And it's being, you know, librarians and archivists are okay with this to some degree because they need money to preserve digital materials. But at the same time that money is going into preserving digital, it's going away, it's marginalizing analog materials. So I started thinking about the problematic situation of analog objects. And I was thinking, how can we make spaces for physical materials that are not only safe, but formative, spaces that create new possibilities. And I realized that we had a precedent, and it was libraries. So libraries have been spaces of collaboration and making for a very, very long time. My spouse, Megan, and I operate a library in San Francisco. This is what it looks like from the street when the lights are on. And we've tried to experiment with turning a library into a space that is more than just a space for reading and research, but a space where people are decided we wanted to open up our books to the public. So we see about 1,000 visitors a year in the library. You know, library, it's misleading because it holds a lot of paper. I don't know how much, maybe 30,000 books. We think about 60 or 70,000 pieces of ephemera, 700 series runs of magazines. We don't know. We like documents that have value as evidence. We like evidence more than we like essays and stories and narratives. So, you know, we've got some postmodern cultural theory, a little bit. We have some, you know, important works of theory and history, but mostly we have ephemera. And we like ephemera better than we like magazines. And we like magazines better than we like books. So what do we cover? We cover underrepresented historical narratives. We cover the history of nature and its interaction with culture, history of people interacting with the landscape, technology, social and political issues. We have a small, the most popular collection probably among our youngest visitors is the anarchism and utopianism section. And so we put the comfortable chair next to anarchism and utopianism. People fall asleep there. History of the media, history of advertising. So like 15M, we think of the library as a banco de bank of ideas. But you know, it's not necessarily good ideas. We make a joke that the library is 98% false consciousness. Ideas that in their time were provisional, incomplete, kind of bad ideas. This is an old government study about youth, crime, and delinquency. And it's filled with all the devices to understand crime as a physiological phenomenon, you know, to measure the shape of the head and the angle of the forehead and the extension of the jaw. This is, you know, what tax dollars were spent on in the early part of the 20th century. Unlike most libraries, we have no catalog. We don't like catalogs. And one of the reasons we don't like catalogs, if you go to a modern library, of course you see a computer terminal and you type in your query. And to us that's reductive. We want people to be surprised, so we privilege serendipity, we privilege discovery. Serendipity is so hard on the web. You know, we have a query-based web. I mean, the Wikipedia clients will suggest to you a random article, and that's always really interesting. It's usually, you know, a county in Czechoslovakia or a football club somewhere. You know, those are the random articles that come up. But there's so little serendipity on the web, but our library is all about serendipity. So there's a geospatial arrangement. There's a cluster. All the books about space are in one place. All the books about city planning are in one place, unless they're about a special city. But you discover by browsing a lot of accident, a lot of excitement. So who uses a library? It's young. It's mostly young people. Our oldest user was 101 years old, and he came to donate his self-published books on English legal history. He read about us, and he showed up, and he had beautiful translucent skin like parchment, dressed in a suit, and we talked for a while. He had graduated from law school in 1929, and then he said, "Where do I get a taxi?" And he walked out and got a taxi by himself and went home. But most of our users are under about 26, 27. Many of them come from the art world. We do a lot of art classes. We have a lot of art students who come, people looking for material to transform and to appropriate into their own work. We're open at the moment 1 day a week. We'll go back to our 2-day-a-week schedule in the fall when we finish the project, and we're also trying to, you know, 2 of us started the library, but we would like it, maybe, possibly, to evolve into some kind of a communal practice. A lot of our material has archival value. You know, we have 10,000 or more zines, many of which are unusual. We cannot run this library forever, and we're interested in what kind of structure might sustain a collection. Where the most important attribute of the collection is the community that's grown up around it. We think that we've made the transition from being just a collection, a simple repository, into a community workshop. And we would like to help take this further. Also, we support this library financially ourselves with profits from selling archival footage. But the archival footage business has been terrible in the last few years. So we'd like to try to turn some of our community support into financial support. It costs $26,000 a year to run the library. I told some of you this last night. We built a temporary library at Maker Faire for 2 years. We've done other temporary libraries like that. This idea, this really resonates with book camping. We feel that we've made the move from a repository to workshop. This is such an important distinction for us. And I'll tell you another distinction. This is a really simple idea. It hit me several years ago, but I think it's a formative idea. So I was walking down the street in Pittsburgh with a professor of archival practice. She also teaches film studies. And she said, you know, I was trying to get my cinema students interested in archives, but they didn't care. I said, why didn't they care? Archives are, of course, the most interesting thing in the world. And she said, I guess they felt archives were the end of it all, the place where films go to die. This was a huge moment, an aha moment, a moment of understanding for me, because I realized that we all got things completely backwards, right? I thought, what if we could reconceive the archive as a point of origin, as a birthplace for new works, and as a rebirthing venue for old works, so that if we think of the archive as an incubation point for new culture, and for new social materials, suddenly this whole layer of bad ideas begins to disappear. And then it gets it helps us with these other problems. You know, archives need financial support, but they need more than that. They need a social and cultural consensus for legitimacy and to get that support. And whether or not we speak about it, the consensus rests upon a perception that archives are valuable, that they fulfill an important cultural role. And now, you know, it's not clear that archives are necessary because people see this potentially instantaneous access to material online. This is a real problem with moving image archives. You know, the people that write the check say, well, let's just put it on YouTube, you know, and put the film in the refrigerator. So archives, classical archives, digital and analog, they will be respected or disrespected according to the level of access that we provide. So that, you know, while archives may have originally come about for preservation, preservation may be our raison d'etre, but access is our connection with the world. So I'm talking about, in a sense, challenging the goals, the ends of archival work, but also I'm interested in the means. You know, as I said yesterday, workflow itself is political. Workflow reinforces certain hierarchies. It can reinforce enclosure. The projects which we've been hearing about are wonderful because openness is built into the core of these projects, whether it's the linguistic and folkloric projects, whether it's 15 May, whether it's book camping. Openness is built into the core. We try to do this at Internet Archive as well. And you know, the tools that we have for openness are imperfect, but at least we're trying. We don't have a way, for example, to completely viralize. You know, there's certain licenses, there's Richard Stallman's licenses and all that, but it's very, very hard to completely viralize something and prevent it from becoming a commodity. But workflow, what kind of workflow could bridge classical archival work that leads towards preservation and storing things, and work that's more modern that leads towards digitization and access? So, a case study. My case study is about analog personal documents going to digital, which is specifically home movies. And I'm talking about this because I just love home movies. I think home movies are the cat's pajamas. You know, I see the world in home movies. But this case study applies directly to, let's say, the proliferating records of any social movement. Think about camera phone videos, think about graffiti, think about leaflets, think about people's personal testimonies or audio recording. Home movies, like many of the records that we've been talking about, challenge conventional archival practice. You know, archives know how to focus on records of the state and institutions, businesses, and they know how to focus on works of artistic or historical importance, but they don't know, they're not well equipped to deal with extremely granular records of everyday life. When you start to collect home movies, it's like what Bertolt Brecht said. You are forced to choose between being human and having good taste. Home movies require a new kind of curatorial attitude where you can stare infinity in the face and you can smile. We have about 9,000 of them. All from the film era. I chose not to collect video because video is so hard to collect. You need to collect machines, you need to work with engineers, but film, you know, is quite durable and it sits quietly. This is what, I opened up a box that came in and you see in the middle, it's a reel of home movies. It says more hippies. I thought that was pretty good. A few attributes about home movies. So they're inherently populist, you know. People love watching them. Part of it is that they can be very mundane and quotidian. Part of it is that you're looking at ordinary people. And you know, home movies, a small digression, if you've watched, I don't know if television documentaries look the same in Europe as they do in the United States. But in the United States, if you want to raise money for a documentary, you need characters. You need people that have a certain kind of screen presence, and you need people with problems. You have to, if you want to get money to make a documentary, it has to be about people who have problems and who have hope. So, you know, the classical plot of, if you go to these documentary festivals, all the films have the same dramatic structure. You know, my blind grandfather, the survivor of World War II, is getting kicked out of his house today. What will we do? It's the same story. And it's not a form, it's over-narrativization. It's not a form that helps you think about ways to everything okay? It's not a form that helps you think about ways to change things. It's simply a celebration of the obvious. Home movies resolve these problems because the narrative is built into home movies. There's the interaction between the person that is shooting and the person that is being photographed. There's the body language, the gestures, the speech of the people that are in the home movies. I do a lot of local history screenings in the United States, especially in San Francisco and Detroit, and people are mesmerized. And then the home movies are essentially infinite. And because of that, you need to mobilize the public to locate them, to collect them, to look and analyze them and describe them. And public participation, like in the May 15 project, helps you unpack these details that are part of local or specialized knowledge. You know, it's like at the Internet Archive, the railroad buffs, the train spotters, identify the railroad footage, and they say, oh yeah, that's locomotive number 3603 around Horseshoe Curve, and it's got to be sometime in the late 40s because the trees are this height. You know, it's amazing. A bunch of archives are using user tagging right now, and I'd like to call your attention to this quotation, which I did not translate, but it says, labor dispute and demonstration of relief clients, you know, people on public assistance, their documents will not be preserved and organized except as individuals or local institutions get involved. This man, Robert Bingley, is not known very well, but he's a key figure in thinking about archives and documentation as social practice. So home movies also help articulate a new relationship between individuals and archives. This relationship is critically important right now because home movies awaken possibilities for archives, both old and new, to address the situation of personal records. And personal records, records generated by ordinary people and records about ordinary people, this is the new archival frontier. As you know, most archives collect institutional records, or government records, or school records, or church records. But it's this personal archiving is very, very important. This is my front window. And if you look in the lower right, you will see Google Street View in spring 2008. They saw a film projector with a reel of film. Do you see that? Kind of hard to see. But anyway, trust me. There's a reel of film. You can see that I have a film projector in my house. And then later that year they came and it was gone. And this is a case where Google has captured a piece of personal information about me that's very interesting. And if you think of them going to photograph the street view of a community that's changing very rapidly. For example, in California, if you look at Google Street View and you see that fences, there's fences around people's yards. Well, this is very characteristic of the Mexican-American community in California. It's a vernacular architectural tradition that you build a fence around your garden, not a tall fence, and not a fence that's opaque, you can see through it, but it's just an architectural tradition. You can see this on Google Street View. In fact, you can argue that the delta between the change over time in Google Street View, this is incredibly valuable information. You can argue that the digital model of the city of Detroit may be worth more than the real estate itself because it allows people to, it supports speculation, it supports policing, it supports development and all sorts of, I mean, this is a little bit off record, but the point is people are interested in this. In 100 years, people are going to want to understand Who lived in that house? What was a day in their life like? Is there any video showing them cooking dinner in the kitchen? You know, that's the stuff that we've got to figure out how to save. So I think that the successful archive of the future will figure out how to integrate institutional, government, public archival material with personal material. Because the personal versus the institutional are two kind of oppositional but codependent ways of addressing the past. So we have to merge the collective and the personal. Because ephemeral culture, you know, it's like air around us. We all inhale and exhale it. I think this is a much bigger challenge, by the way, than the so-called digital challenge. There's another reason. These are precarious times, and archives need to figure out ways that they will be supported by the public. And I think that one way that they can get public support is to collect personal records. I've been advocating that the Internet Archive become a portal for people's personal archives, because then we would have 5 million or whatever, 5 million new supporters, and they might be very helpful if the music industry ever tries to catch us and close us down. So home movies challenge and personal records challenge traditional archives, but in a more profound way they challenge archival workflow and the practices that are passed down. Archivists have never quite gotten the balance straight between these macro and micro narratives, and the workflows are not the same. More about that later. Also, home movies live in regional and specialized archives, and at least in the US, it sounds like it may be here as well. This is where the interesting work is happening. The innovation is not happening at the National Archives or at the Library of Congress. The new social history, the new archives, all sorts of the newer workflows, these are all happening on the periphery. This is where people do community history partnerships, where they reach out to the public, where they're close to the people who are concerned with their material. This has been very abstract, and I'd like to make it a little bit less abstract. Why personal records? Why home movies? So some people yesterday urged that I show a little bit, so I'm going to show. I got a grant to make a new feature film, and the feature film is called No More Road Trips. And it's about the fact that in America we are traveling less. Young people are less interested in cars, apparently. It's also expensive to travel. We have not experienced gasoline at $5 a gallon before. I know the rest of the world, except for Venezuela and Kuwait, has experienced this for many years, but we never did. And yet we have this American mythology that we can always get up and go somewhere, that we can always escape, that we can always migrate. Many of us, of course, have migrated involuntarily. But the notion of traveling and the freedom of the road is ingrained in American consciousness. Now it's threatened by energy shortages, by economic precarity, by a sense that the local may be the important arena for us to act. So what I'm doing is making a movie about how we're going to deal with this change, how we're going to deal with this disappointment, how we will deal with the constraint upon the freedom to travel. So this is not edited. This is just a compilation to show in the last 4 or 5 months I've been looking in my collection. And this is some of the new material that I've found. And this is intended to be shown to an audience that will speak. I don't like to make movies that are where people can't talk. So the audience is going to be invited to talk about this. Boy, it's hard to see, isn't it? I'm sorry. This is Times Square in New York, and this is New Jersey. It's this is beautiful color from 1939, but unfortunately the sun is too bright to see it. So all of this was shot by ordinary people. Can you see enough? Is this worthwhile? Okay. Oh, thank you. Undo. Nancy. I did. This is a family camping in 1932, and they've put out pictures of Hoover and Roosevelt. I don't know why. This is an African-American family's home movies. That was what we just saw. This is an astonishing roll of film that was shot by a Coca-Cola salesman. And it's all the little stores in Ohio and this bank. And it's an incredible record of the American landscape in the early years of the Depression in 1931. It's just astonishing. These are scans, by the way, that we made at the Internet Archive for about $20 an hour. The old penny candy. State of Michigan, downtown Detroit in the 60s with the new buildings. This is a man visiting Texas. And this, he's pointing to where supposedly the bullets were shot, the grassy knoll in Dallas, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And that's the Texas School Book Deposit. This was 1964, so right after the assassination, he's revisiting it. And not only that, he's reenacting Kennedy's limousine route. I mean, astonishing what you find in home movies. Kind of sick as well. In Kansas, and then somewhere else, wild burros, I think. Classic Western image, racing the train. And a lot of these images are kind of, deeply ingrained. The New Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas, the Pioneer Casino. A man who photographed everything. This is a motel. He photographed the bathroom. The mountains of California, almost all the way across. A homemade trailer. 1939. The oranges. And then this is at the border between Washington State and British Columbia, and it's 3 Asian American women who are drinking water at the it's called the Peace Arch. It says children of a common mother. And this is, of course, in Mexico. So footage is very interesting. You know, I looked through about 40 hours to put this together, and there's a lot more. So all of this has led me to the sense that we need to figure out a way to build participatory physical archives. So what does that mean? Some of you must be familiar with Raghunathan's second and third laws of library science. The second law is that every reader, his or her book, and the third law is that every book has a reader. And I think there's a film for every viewer, and a viewer for every film. And not only that, there's people who would love to reuse material if they can be connected to this. And this is when the limits on access seem most critical. And so I started wondering if we could go further than we've done at the Internet Archive. I mean, that's pretty good to give people digital access to historic materials and let them use it. But I wanted to go further and to figure out a way to open up physical collections. So could we have hands-on access to film that might not be digitized or preserved? And you know, right now, if you go to a moving image archive, most of the time, you're not going to be able to touch film that has not been preserved. In other words, it hasn't been copied to next generation film. There's reasons why. There's archival protocols which are designed to safeguard material from damaging risks. But you know, ethics are starting to collide with reality. Archives are choked with film and tape. Many have stopped accepting new collections. Our collection went to the Library of Congress before I started collecting home movies. Our collection of industrial and advertising and educational films went to the Library of Congress in 2002. And there's an underground hallway, and there's 400 feet of pallets containing boxes of film from our archives that they don't have the time or the money to unpack. And then, like I said, as we focus more on digital, analog is going to be harder and harder to deal with. The backlog is going to stagnate. There'll be some exceptions, but it's just, you know, when you deal with physical materials in an archive, it's artisanal work, it's skilled work, it's like working with manuscripts. You know, we'll never be able to do it systematically. And so collections grow out of control, and the goal of perpetual stewardship becomes harder and harder to pursue. And you know, inaccessibility sends culture into liminality. And huge sections of our cultural heritage are already out of reach. Some people say, well, let's just digitize it quick and dirty. But this is really hard. We're not going to be able to do this easily. One attempt is this archive I talked about yesterday, Mayday Rooms, which just started up in London. They bought a building on Fleet Street, right across from Goldman Sachs, because they have money from the Glasshouse Trust, which is Alex Sainsbury, the supporter of the arts. And with their attempt, they're a new project. They want to rescue endangered collections that relate to social and political activism, especially anarchism. There's a lot of collections that are threatened in the UK now because of cuts. And they also want to be an active archives. They want to collect quickly. They want to put material out to the world. But I believe they're caught in the middle of this dilemma. They don't want to collect a lot of physical objects either. They don't want to become an attic or a storage room. I think they're going to become more of a meeting place and a working commons with an archival flavor, but not a repository. This is our library, by the way, before we unpacked it. There's just too much, right? There will only be more. This idea that there's going to be a priesthood of archivists who are going to take vows of poverty and obedience and work through everything is not going to happen. So I think what we have to do is let the public into the area that's reserved for staff so that they can work directly with material. This notion of hospitality and touch. So if a scholar is interested in home movies on a certain subject or from a certain place, let him or her do that work. And in fact, I think that hospitality and touch should be a key attribute of every modern cultural repository, whether it's online or offline. We could say no, or we can try to make this possible. Let's see what happens. So we built a participatory physical home movie archives. We've been lent some space at Internet Archive, and we've assembled a group of volunteers. And the volunteers, there's 17 of them, and they each work about 4 hours a week, and in exchange for their labor, they're getting training from myself and from a classically trained moving image archivist in handling, inspecting, repairing, processing, evaluating motion picture film. It turns out that these are pretty good skills because although there's a lot of archivists around, there's not enough. There's much more demand for these services than people ready to do it. So in addition to being a top-down training, it's also a circular skill share. People share experience, they're putting together a handbook of their findings, there's a blog. One way of looking at this is that this group could turn into a co-op, it could turn into a company, it could turn into some kind of organized group of people who contract to take on projects, and already some people are getting work. So this isn't just a volunteer program, it's an attempt to trade education for labor. And it's been great. We've gone through about 1,300 items, and they're beginning to show up online. They're preparing what I think is the raw material of research and scholarship in ways that we can only imagine. You know, home movies encompass all of life. I think of doing things like an ethnographic jukebox, where you lightly tag home movies, and then if you type in birthdays, or picnic, or woman in bathroom, like we just saw, suddenly this material turns up. Imagine a geotag database of the world as shot by home movie makers over time. Imagine this is my Kickstarter I want to do, hire lip readers to look at home movies from the 1930s and see what are people saying. That's a great barrier. You see the lips moving, but you don't know what they're saying. Also this is one of these cases where I think computers will do a lot of the analysis. So, as I wind up, why are we doing this? I talked about how history and memory and cultural continuity were civic functions, and archivists needed to think of themselves as social actors. At the very least, it means that archivists need to be very active in the public and social sphere and foreground the importance of our work. Many of you seem to be already doing that, which is awesome. And it also means that citizens should engage in archival work in their own circles, that archival practice become universalized. I love, this is Mr. Binkley again with such a great quote about why are we doing this? That we must enrich the historical consciousness of all people. I think I don't need to say this to you, but this notion of the archive is an actively cultivated garden that at the same time you're planting, you're also harvesting. And this is, really the idea of the active archive where material is flowing in and material is also being used at the same time. Much of this has been, the conversation around the Occupy Archives project in New York, where activists are interested in a place that's a resource, where if they want to pull down footage of something that happened the night before in another city, they can do that. But at the same time, this conflicts with a more classically minded archival perspective of, well, let's get a file in, let's catalog it, let's migrate it, let's get our metadata straight, and so on. Last thought. It's not a new thought. I think science, the work of science and the practice of science has a lot of important implications for archives. It's open, it's distributed. Open access has proceeded much quicker in science than in the humanities. The scientific method is also self-critical. It's falsifiable, as my guy Kim Stanley Robinson says, scientific method is political praxis. But in the meantime, let's keep the present in mind and have some fun too. And that's what I have to say for today. Thank you.
Gracias, Rick. No sé si tenéis preguntas, cuestiones, comentarios. La verdad es que ha lanzado muchas cosas. No sé, a ver qué se anima. Y aprovechamos los 10 últimos minutos. Yo, igual, personalmente, comentar que comparto completamente la idea de biblioteca como laboratorio, ¿no? Y quizás comentar que esa es un poco la idea que estamos intentando desarrollar dentro de Tabakalera en cuanto a la idea de biblioteca, ¿no? Es más, no es una biblioteca, no es un laboratorio, pero sí son las dos cosas y bueno, igual también, no sé, que se difunda esa idea y que seamos capaces de llegar a llevarlo a cabo, ¿no? Pues sería muy interesante, o sea que ya podríamos intercambiar un poco ideas sobre este tema, no sé, si alguien tiene algo más que comentar. Aprovechar, es un lujo tener a Herri aquí.
I mean, it would be interesting if every library and archives, it became a new tradition that there was a room or a space in which people were supposed to make things. You know, right now they have special rooms, you know, to get teenagers into libraries. They have rooms where you can play games. But what if you had a room where you could make something? And what if libraries, when they decided to throw something away, put it in a room where somebody could use it, they could cut it up, they could scan it. You know what I mean? They just incorporate the notion of cultural and social production into the core of a place.
En el que añadiríamos información, o formación, ¿no? En el que poder añadir formación, capacitar para poder llevar esas cosas adelante. Pero tenemos el riesgo de igual de irnos ya hacia otro debate también muy interesante. Bien, pues... Maite,
Gracias, Rick, otra vez. He intentado tuitear, ha sido imposible porque has lanzado una bomba tras otra, creo. Dos comentarios, no son preguntas. Me ha fascinado que estés haciendo, que hagas que tus películas siempre estén basadas en cine mudo para que la gente pueda comentarlas directamente a live, ¿no? Cuando la gente puede verlas, para que las comenten, para que se crean situaciones ahí. Y luego la idea de el cambio del workflow, normalmente de la gestión de un archivo, a cómo esto el workflow se tiene que reinventar todo el rato, ¿no? En esa nueva idea, concepción de archivo vivo, ya no de un proceso, digamos, estipulado, yo no sé tecnología, tanto aquí archivero no se me da apuro yo, pero el cambio del workflow. Sin más, un comentario, no sé, me ha fascinado tu charla. Gracias.
Well, if you think about the ways that attempts to reorganize industrial work, where workers are involved in this process, there's of course a long history of these. Some have been successful, many have not. But you know, the museum, library, and archives process has been hasn't changed as much as the way that you know, collaboration and cooperation is understood in other spheres of work, and I'd love to see that happen. You know, just one word about silent film. So when I do my screenings in San Francisco, let's say, there's a little bit of audio, but basically I have a microphone and the audience is just invited to shout. They can identify things, they can ask a question, they can dispute. You know, Trotskyists will yell, that's a Communist Party member, he was a sellout, all sorts of amazing things happen. Every screening is different. Live cinema is very au courant right now, but a lot of times live cinema is simply performed according to a pre-existing score. And I like unpredictable screenings. My road trip movie, there's going to be people talking on the soundtrack, but the audience will be invited to talk. I'm tired of being quiet in movies. Movies are over. They've become big, multinational spectacles with big money behind them, and even a smaller movie. There's very few movies where it's appropriate to be totally silent, I think. Let's just open up the mouth, otherwise you could stay home and watch TV. So you're all invited to come visit the library in San Francisco, and you can be artists and scholars and residents. We'll take care of you and find you a nice meal and anything we can do to help. And I would also say, in case any of you didn't pick up on this, that Internet Archive posts material for free. You can deep link into the Internet Archive so that it's transparent to users of whatever service or application you're doing, and if there's ways that we can help any of you with projects, just please get in touch and I'll try to connect you with the right people. Wonderful to meet you all, and thank you so much for your attention.
Simplemente para finalizar, dar las gracias a la UPV por dejarnos colaborar con ellos desde la Tabacalera y organizar este curso. Dar las gracias a todos los participantes, profesores y especialistas que habéis propuesto vuestros proyectos, nos habéis enseñado y yo creo que ha sido muy interesante para seguir aprendiendo y seguir pensando qué es lo que queremos ir creando en nuestras instituciones y en nuestros proyectos. Y por otro lado, y gracias a todos los que os habéis inscrito y habéis participado en el curso, y esperamos haber podido responder lo mejor posible a las expectativas que teníais. Gracias y hasta la próxima. Milles gracias.